Michael Williams was the kind of man everyone respected, a loving husband, a devoted father, and a hard-working professional. Born and raised in Florida, he grew up in a modest yet supportive home. His parents, Cheryl and Jerry Williams, worked tirelessly to give him and his older brother Nick the best life they could. Jerry, a Greyhound bus driver, and Cheryl, who ran a home daycare, weren't rich, but they made sacrifices to ensure their sons received a good education. They enrolled them in private school, believing it would open doors to a better future. From an early age, Michael stood out. He was ambitious, driven, and always ready to achieve more. He never simply walked, he ran. His energy was infectious, and his charisma made him a natural leader. At North Florida Christian School, he excelled both academically and socially. He was elected class president, played sports, and made a name for himself as a young man destined for success. But it was in the 9th grade that Michael's life took a fateful turn, one that, at the time, seemed like a love story. On his very first day of high school, he met Denise Merrill. Their connection was immediate, almost like something from a movie, the football player and the cheerleader, the all-American high school sweethearts. Denise would later say, "I knew when I met Michael that I was going to marry him." And she did. On December 17, 1994, Michael and Denise tied the knot in a beautiful wedding ceremony. They settled into married life, building their future together. Michael pursued a degree in political science and city planning and later found work as a real estate appraiser at Ketchum Realty. He was successful and well-respected in his field. Life was falling into place. Then, in 1999, their joy multiplied when they welcomed their daughter, Ansley. Michael was over the moon. Fatherhood became his greatest pride, and everything he did was for his wife and child. He was the kind of man who worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and lived by the rules. His only real hobby was hunting, a passion he shared with his best friend, Brian Winchester. Then, on December 16, 2000, just one day before his 6th wedding anniversary, Michael left his Tallahassee home early in the morning to go duck hunting on Lake Seminole. It was supposed to be a quick trip. He planned to be home by noon so he and Denise could leave for a romantic weekend getaway in Apalachicola. But he never returned. By late afternoon, Denise started to worry. When she couldn't reach him, she called Brian Winchester, asking if he had heard from Michael. Brian immediately sprang into action, driving out to Lake Seminole with his father to search for his best friend. When they arrived, they found Michael's truck parked near the lake's boat landing. The vehicle was locked, and his boat trailer was still attached. But there was no sign of Michael. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, was called in, and soon a full-scale search was underway. Officers, volunteers, and law enforcement scoured the vast lake, but there was nothing, no body, no clues. The following day, Michael's boat was found floating, perfectly intact. Inside, investigators found his shotgun still in its case, life jackets, and duck decoys. Nothing was out of place, which puzzled authorities. If he had been actively hunting when something went wrong, wouldn't there be signs of disturbance? A struggle, mud, water in the boat. But everything was pristine. Then a chilling realization set in. Michael had been wearing rubber waders when he left that morning. If he had fallen into the water, the waders could have filled up, making it nearly impossible for him to stay afloat. Some searchers theorized that he had drowned and his body had been eaten by alligators. It was a gruesome thought, but for a lake like Seminole, home to large gators, it was considered plausible. Days turned into weeks. The search continued, but Michael's body never surfaced. After 44 days, authorities officially called off the search, ruling his disappearance an accidental drowning. Denise wasted no time in moving on. She collected Michael's $1.75 million life insurance payout and had him declared legally dead just 6 months later, an unusually fast decision for someone whose body was never found. But Cheryl Williams refused to accept it. She knew her son. He was too careful, too experienced as a hunter to simply fall in and drown. And alligators? In all her years living in Florida, she had never heard of an alligator consuming an entire body, leaving behind no trace, not a bone, not a piece of clothing. Something wasn't right. For the next 17 years, she became a relentless force, writing letters to law enforcement, the media, and anyone who would listen. But her suspicions fell on deaf ears. Meanwhile, life went on for Denise. She continued raising Ansley, living comfortably with the fortune she had collected. Then, in a turn of events that seemed suspicious to some, she later married Brian Winchester, Michael's best friend, the very man who had led the search for him that night. For years, the truth remained buried. But in 2016, everything unraveled. Denise and Brian's marriage had begun to deteriorate. Brian, who had his demons, became increasingly unstable. When Denise threatened to leave him, he snapped. In a desperate attempt to keep her in his life, he kidnapped her at gunpoint. She escaped unharmed, and Brian was arrested. Facing a lengthy prison sentence for armed kidnapping, he had no choice but to start talking. What he revealed was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Michael Williams hadn't drowned that morning. He had been murdered. Brian confessed that he and Denise had been having an affair for years. Together, they had meticulously planned Michael's death. With Michael out of the picture, they could collect his life insurance money and finally be together. But Brian had second thoughts about Denise, and now, sitting in jail, he was ready to tell the truth. On the morning of December 16, 2000, Brian met Michael at Lake Seminole under the guise of a normal hunting trip. Once they were out on the water, Brian pushed Michael overboard, expecting him to drown quickly. But Michael fought to stay afloat. Panicked that the plan wasn't working, Brian grabbed his shotgun and shot Michael in the face at point-blank range. He then loaded Michael's body into his truck and drove 60 miles to a secluded area near Carr Lake, where he dug a shallow grave and buried him. 17 years later, Brian led investigators to the site. Michael's remains were recovered, still clad in his waders. The medical examiner confirmed what Cheryl Williams had always known. Michael hadn't drowned. He had been brutally murdered. Brian struck a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for his cooperation, he received immunity from a murder charge and was sentenced to 20 years for kidnapping Denise. But Denise wasn't so lucky. In 2018, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and accessory after the fact. Her trial was swift. The prosecution painted her as the mastermind behind Michael's murder, a woman who had coldly plotted her husband's death for money and another man. The jury saw through her lies, convicting her after just 8 hours of deliberation. On February 6, 2019, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. She remains incarcerated at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. For Cheryl, the fight was finally over. She had spent nearly 2 decades searching for justice, refusing to believe the lies spun by Denise and Brian. Though nothing could bring Michael back, she finally had closure. Michael Williams was 31 years old when his life was stolen by the 2 people he trusted most. His story serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the greatest betrayals don't come from strangers, but from the ones closest to us. Ed and Minnie Morren were the kind of people everyone in their community admired, kind, hard-working, and deeply rooted in their way of life. Living in rural Washington, the elderly couple had built a peaceful existence, running a Christmas tree farm and maintaining strong ties with family and friends. At 85 years old, they had lived long, fulfilling lives, surrounded by people who loved them. But in December 1985, their quiet world was shattered in a way no one could have ever imagined. The nightmare began on the evening of December 19th, when Mike Hadler received an urgent call from his father, asking him to come to his grandparents' home immediately. The tone in his father's voice told him something was wrong. When he arrived at Ed and Minnie's house, he was greeted by a police officer who delivered unsettling news. His grandparents were missing, and there were signs of foul play. As he stepped inside, the scene before him only deepened his dread. Papers were strewn across the floor, including bank statements that had been kept neatly in shoeboxes. Minnie's purse, something she never left home without, sat tucked behind the couch. The couple had vanished without a trace, and the fear that something terrible had happened to them gripped their family and community. The following morning, detectives responded to a report that a vehicle matching the description of the Morrens' car had been found in the parking lot of Yardbird Shopping Mall. The discovery was chilling. The car was covered in blood, and the dashboard bore the marks of shotgun pellets. Ed's hat, which he was rarely seen without, lay discarded on the floorboard. But there was still no sign of Ed and Minnie. For hours, search efforts intensified until the unthinkable was confirmed. Mike Hadler received another call, this time informing him that his grandparents' bodies had been found on a remote logging road. A friend of the family was the one who made the grim discovery. Minnie's body lay on the side of the road, while Ed's was hidden in a nearby brush. Both had been shot, Minnie in the shoulder and neck, and Ed in the back. The scene was horrifying, with drag marks indicating that they had been pulled from their vehicle and left like discarded trash. The brutality of their deaths sent shockwaves through the community, leaving their loved ones reeling. Who would commit such a heinous crime against two defenseless elderly people? The investigation quickly became a frustrating battle against time. Police found no murder weapon, no clear fingerprints at the crime scene, and no usable DNA evidence, as forensic technology at the time was still in its infancy. They combed through every possible lead, collecting dozens of fingerprints from the house and the vehicle, but the majority belonged to the Morrens and their family members. The most significant clue was a bank receipt found in Ed's pocket, showing that he had withdrawn $8,500 from his account shortly before his death. This raised an immediate question. Who knew about this money? As detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the final hours of the Morrens' lives, they uncovered key details. The bank teller who had assisted Ed recalled seeing someone in the car with him, though she wasn't able to make a clear identification. This led authorities to explore the possibility that the crime was orchestrated by someone close to the couple, perhaps even a family member. Suspicion briefly fell on Mike Hadler, as he had a criminal record and was known to smoke, while cigarette butts had been found in the Morrens' car. The accusations enraged him, as he was grieving and desperate for answers himself. The case took an unexpected turn when two women came forward, reporting that they had seen a man leaving the scene where the car was abandoned. A composite sketch was drawn, and investigators compiled a photo lineup of potential suspects. However, none of the witnesses could positively identify the person they had seen. The case grew colder with each passing year. For decades, the Morrens family suffered, their grief compounded by the frustration of unanswered questions. Mike Hadler, overwhelmed by anger and sorrow, struggled with the weight of suspicion and the agony of knowing that his grandparents' killers were still walking free. Meanwhile, the investigation remained stagnant, with law enforcement unable to pin down solid leads. Then, after more than 20 years, a breakthrough finally emerged. Bruce Kimsey, a detective with the Lewis County Sheriff's Office, took another look at the case to uncover new evidence. He meticulously re-interviewed every witness, determined to find the missing piece of the puzzle. It was during this re-investigation that an old high school friend of Mike's, Jake Shriver, came forward with a confession that would change everything. Jake had lived with a terrible secret for decades. He recalled the day of the murders when he had been riding with his mother along Highway 12. They had passed a slow-moving car, and, in that fleeting moment, he saw who was inside. Ed and Minnie sat in the front, and in the back seat were two men he recognized instantly, Rick and Greg Riff, former workers on the Morrens Christmas tree farm. Days later, Greg Riff had confronted him, warning him not to speak of what he had seen. The threat was chilling. If he talked, his entire family would be killed. Fear kept Jake silent for years, but as time passed, the weight of his guilt became unbearable. With this crucial testimony, the police had what they needed to move forward. Investigators pieced together a horrifying scenario. The Riff brothers had likely broken into the Morrens' home searching for money. When they didn't find it, they kidnapped the elderly couple, forcing Ed to withdraw cash from the bank before executing them in cold blood. By the time authorities had enough evidence to make an arrest, the years had taken their toll. Greg Riff had already passed away, but Rick Riff was still alive and living in Alaska. In 2012, detectives traveled there to confront him. They found a man who looked nothing like the once intimidating criminal. He was frail, sickly, and tethered to an oxygen machine. When officers informed him of the charges, 2 counts of murder, kidnapping, and robbery, he showed little reaction. The trial was a long and emotional ordeal for the Morrens family. The prosecution laid out a compelling case, using Jake Shriver's testimony and other key evidence to prove that Rick Riff had played a central role in the murders. Despite his failing health, justice was finally served. In 2013, a jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 103 years in prison and was sent to the Washington State Department of Corrections, where he would spend the remainder of his days behind bars. For the Morrens family, the conviction brought a bittersweet sense of closure. The pain of losing Ed and Minnie in such a cruel and senseless manner would never fully heal. But knowing that at least one of their killers would pay for his crimes offered some relief. After nearly 3 decades, the long fight for justice had finally ended. Rick Riff remained defiant even in his final days, never admitting to the murders, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. His family maintained his innocence, claiming he had been unfairly targeted. But for the Morrens' loved ones, the truth was clear. The man responsible for their agony had finally faced the consequences of his actions. The case of Ed and Minnie Morren serves as a haunting reminder of how greed can drive people to commit unimaginable acts. But it is also a testament to the perseverance of law enforcement and the unwavering dedication of a family that refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. The decades-long pursuit of justice proved that no matter how much time passes, the truth will always find a way to the surface. The year is 1974, a time when life moved at a slower pace and communities felt tightly knit. The Wilson family was one of those families that seemed to have it all. John Wilson, an 11-year-old boy with a mischievous smile, was always at the center of attention. His 13-year-old sister, Elizabeth, or Liz as she was called, was the more serious yet equally captivating sibling. She was bright, confident, and full of dreams. Liz loved school, enjoyed reading, and was known for her quick wit. She was close to her family, especially to her younger brother John, with whom she shared an unspoken bond. They were a typical American family, living in Prairie Village, Kansas, a place where kids rode their bikes to the local pool and parents didn't have to worry much about where their children were going. In those early years, Liz was excelling in her studies and had a growing circle of friends. She had a passion for tennis, which she played with a competitive spirit, often seen practicing at the neighborhood courts near the local swimming pool. John and Liz were often together, whether they were playing sports, walking to the pool, or sharing secrets only siblings understand. The Wilsons, like so many families, had no idea how their lives would soon be shattered by an unimaginable tragedy. As the summer of 1974 progressed, the weather was warm, and the days felt endless. For Liz and John, it was just another summer day. Little did they know that on one ordinary evening, their lives would take a tragic turn. It started with an innocent plan, a swim at the local pool, a moment of freedom and fun. But as the sun began to set, a dark shadow would forever change the course of their lives. On that summer evening in 1974, Liz and John found themselves at the Prairie Village swimming pool. Liz was with her friends and John was in the parking lot, hanging around as young boys often do. The siblings exchanged some words before Liz decided to head out, likely on her way to meet a friend or head home. As John stood in the parking lot, he suddenly heard his name called. He turned around to see Liz running towards him. With a playful gleam in his eye, John planned to jump out and scare her. But as he waited, she never showed up. John waited, confused, thinking she was just playing a game. But as the minutes turned into hours, he realized something was wrong. Liz hadn't returned, and now panic started to set in. Without wasting a moment, John ran home, hoping she would have already made it back. But she hadn't. The Wilsons immediately began to worry. As the night wore on and Liz's absence became more troubling, John's fear turned into an overwhelming sense of dread. The family called the police, but there was no sign of Liz. She had simply vanished. Officers responded quickly, but hours passed with no clues. The search team canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had seen the 13-year-old girl. But there was no sign of Liz. The police found no witnesses, and there were no signs of any struggle. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The only lead that seemed promising was the last known location, near the local high school, where Liz had been seen running past. It was a clue, but not enough to make any sense of the mystery. That's when attention shifted to the school janitor, a man named John Henry Horton. Horton was working that night, and the timing of his activities immediately raised suspicion. His time card showed that he had clocked out for a dinner break at 8 p.m., just about 20 minutes after Liz had been seen. When he returned to work, it was nearly 3 hours later, and he appeared disheveled, shirtless, with scratches on his arms and back. When questioned by police, Horton gave a shaky, unconvincing story. He claimed that his car had broken down, and he had gone to a nearby grocery store to buy food. However, when police checked with the store's employees, no one had seen Horton there during that time. This was a major red flag. What had he been doing during those missing hours? The police had no answers, but they did have a growing sense that Horton might know more than he was letting on. A search of his car revealed even more troubling evidence: sulfuric acid, chloroform, ether, a butcher knife, and some bags. Items like these weren't something a janitor would usually have on hand, but Horton insisted the chloroform was for recreational purposes and the knife was a gift for his wife. The police weren't buying it. His alibi didn't add up, and the evidence in his possession seemed to confirm their worst fears. Horton was connected to Liz's disappearance. Weeks turned into months, and the search for Liz continued. The Wilsons were devastated. The pain of not knowing where their daughter was or what had happened to her gnawed at them every day. As time passed, the case seemed to grow colder. Liz's family held on to hope, but with each passing day it felt like that hope was slipping away. Then, in January of the following year, a construction worker named Fred made a grim discovery. 9 miles from the high school, in a vacant field, Fred uncovered human remains. Skeletal remains, to be precise. Dental records confirmed the worst fear of the Wilson family. The remains belonged to their daughter, Elizabeth. The confirmation was heart-wrenching. For 6 long months, the Wilsons had been holding on to hope that their daughter would come home. But now the grim reality of their loss hit them like a tidal wave. With Liz's body found, the investigation took on new urgency. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses, revisited old leads, and carefully examined everything they had learned about Horton. Then came a breakthrough. A 15-year-old girl named Beth Reichmeyer came forward, recalling an unsettling encounter with Horton on the night Liz disappeared. Beth had been walking home from the pool when she was approached by the janitor. Horton had asked her to help him turn off the water for the trees. It was an odd request, and Beth refused. But her memory of the time and place placed Horton right in the vicinity of where Liz had been just moments before she disappeared. Beth's testimony was a key piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that Horton was in the area during the time Liz went missing, and it placed him close to her. The authorities now believed they had enough evidence to charge Horton with her murder, but the investigation wasn't over yet. There was more to uncover, and the pressure was mounting to bring justice to Liz's family. It took years for the case to reach its conclusion. Detective work, new interviews, and emerging evidence painted a clearer picture of what had happened to Liz. On October 15, 2003, after nearly 3 decades, John Henry Horton was arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Wilson. The authorities believed that Horton had lured Liz into the school by using the ruse of asking her to turn off the water. Once inside, he likely used chloroform to subdue her, but instead of just rendering her unconscious, the substance killed her. Horton had then sexually assaulted her before attempting to conceal the crime. The trial began with a weight of emotional toll that could not be quantified. For the Wilson family, it was a long-awaited moment of justice, but it was bittersweet. The years without their daughter had aged them, and now they were forced to relive their pain in a courtroom. After 6 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning with a verdict: guilty in the first degree. Horton's face showed shock when the verdict was read. He had been caught, and there was no escape. His defense team had tried to argue that the evidence wasn't conclusive, but it was clear to everyone in the courtroom. Horton had murdered Liz. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and he was sent to the Kansas State Penitentiary, where he would spend the rest of his days behind bars. His family, torn between supporting him and facing the reality of his crimes, remained silent as the court proceedings ended. For the Wilson family, the conviction brought a measure of relief, though it would never fully erase the pain of losing their daughter. The passage of time had not been kind to them, but at least they now had the truth. They could finally close the chapter on the nightmare that had haunted them for so long. John Wilson, now a grown man, often wondered what his life would have been like if Liz had survived. He imagined growing old with her, sharing family moments, and seeing her become the woman she was meant to be. But, as he said, he would see her again in heaven. In the end, the case of Elizabeth Wilson was one of horror, but also justice. It showed that even the darkest secrets can eventually be uncovered, no matter how many years pass. For the Wilson family, justice had come, though it could never bring back their beloved daughter. The pain of that loss would remain with them forever, but at least now they could finally find some semblance of peace. The murder of 13-year-old Elizabeth Wilson was a case that haunted her family, investigators, and the Prairie Village community for nearly 3 decades. What started as an ordinary summer evening in 1974 ended in tragedy when Liz disappeared without a trace. Her family's desperate search for answers led to heartbreak when her remains were discovered months later, but the fight for justice had only begun. For years, the case remained cold, with investigators unable to bring charges despite suspicions surrounding school janitor John Henry Horton. But time does not erase the truth. Witness testimonies, forensic evidence, and a relentless pursuit of justice finally led to Horton's arrest in 2003. Though he spent years living freely, believing he had escaped the consequences of his actions, he was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. For Liz's family, the verdict brought a sense of justice, though it could never replace the life that was taken. The pain of losing her remained, but at least they knew the man responsible would never harm another innocent girl again. This case serves as a reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, can still be served. It also highlights the importance of perseverance in investigations, the bravery of witnesses who come forward, and the power of law enforcement to never stop seeking the truth. If you or someone you know has information about a cold case, do not stay silent. Every piece of information, no matter how small, can be the key to solving a mystery and bringing justice to those who deserve it. The truth has a way of resurfacing, even after decades.